We all know in baseball, you only have so many throws in your arm. And it starts at a very early age. You start in Little League, you move on to high school, you move on to college, and if you're fortunate enough to play professional baseball, you've thrown the ball thousands of times. And if you're a pitcher or catcher, you've thrown the ball thousands more times than a position player. And what happens over a period of throwing the baseball over and over, that repetitive overhead motion begins to shorten the muscles in your forearm. And a short muscle then becomes fibrotic, stiff, and brittle. And the third step in this phase is that the muscles break. It creates an injury. So you go from a short muscle to a stiff, fibrotic muscle to an injury. So if you can keep the muscles in your forearm longer, the chances of you moving on to the next step of shortened fibrotic tissue is slim. You have a lot less chance of that happening, which means you have a lot less chance of getting injured. So why not just stretch your forearm? Why use the forearm strong? Isn't this good enough? And the answer is no, it's not good enough. And the reason is this doesn't do a whole lot. And even if you did this every day for a week, you would stretch those muscles as far as they get. We call that stretching to the end of range of motion. But the danger of it is the forearm muscle being used over and over again. Let's just say by high school there's some hidden injury in your forearm that you don't know about because you don't have symptoms yet. But if you're stretching like this before you go out and throw 50, 60, 100 baseballs, you're actually tugging on the elbow. You're actually creating possibly your injury. You're actually possibly contributing to maybe a future injury by stretching those muscles and the tendons from your elbow. So what the forearm strong does is there's an 18-degree tilt in the forearm strong. And we talk about that in the instructions, that always tilts towards your hand. So when you slide it on and create basically a new point of contact by tightening down this knob, now what's happening is you're only stretching from here to here. And this 18-degree tilt is actually pushing your muscles back towards your elbow. So from here to here, you're not going to feel anything. But from here to here, you're going to feel a stretch. So what this does is it gives you the much needed lengthening of those muscles while you're protecting your elbow. Let's go over a few of the parts on the forearm strong before we start. This plastic piece is the cuff, and this is going to wrap around half of your arm. And then this Velcro strap is what tightens the cuff onto your arm. This knob is what you're going to turn and which generates the tension. And inside here you'll see that there's what we call the contact. It's a plastic piece that actually is what presses against your muscles, presses against your skin. The first thing I want you to notice is that the knob is tilted. When you put the forearm strong on, you always slide your hand in with the knob tilting toward your hand. The next thing I want you to do is wiggle the ring finger and pinky finger on your hand so that you can identify the bottom two of the flexor muscles in your forearm. Then slide the forearm strong onto your forearm with the contact right over those flexor muscles. So the knob is basically on the side of your forearm. Then notice that the edge of the forearm strong is at the base of my bicep and at the beginning of my forearm. Then take the strap and tighten it down so it's snug. The next thing you do is bend your arm and let your hand relax. What this does is it puts your forearm muscles in the shortest and most relaxed position. Then tighten the knob onto those flexor muscles about 3 or 4 turns. The next step would be to straighten your arm and stretch. Now what this is doing is creating basically a new attachment point or a point of contact in your forearm. So you're really only stretching from the contact on the forearm strong to your wrist. From the contact back to your elbow, you're not going to feel anything because that tilt is pushing your muscles back towards your elbow. This is very important for baseball players so that you guys don't just stretch and pull on the attachments of the elbow. A typical forearm stretch doesn't give you any protection from pulling on the attachments of the elbow. After you've stretched for about 20 seconds, go back up and relax and stretch again for about 20 seconds. The next step would be to loosen the knob, loosen the Velcro, and then wiggle your middle finger and your index finger to identify the top two of the forearm flexors and rotate the forearm strong on top of those muscles. Tighten down the strap, shorten the forearm flexor muscles by bending your elbow and relaxing your wrist, and then tighten about 3 or 4 more turns onto the top of the forearm flexor muscles that were identified by wiggling the index and middle fingers, and then stretch. Hold that stretch for another 20 seconds or so. You can hold the stretch for 10 seconds, you can hold it for 30 seconds. I like it for about 20 seconds, but it's really going to be up to you what works best. After holding this stretch for, let's just say between 10 and 30 seconds, go back up to a relaxed position, let the wrist fall, and stretch again for the same amount of time. When you're finished stretching in the first 2 positions, loosen the forearm strong and move it down towards your wrist, just about a ½ inch. The first 2 stretches are going to leave impressions on your arm where the forearm strong was contacting your skin prior. Just move the forearm strong in between those 2 impressions. Then tighten down the strap, bend your arm into a 90-degree angle, let your wrist fall again to a relaxed position, tighten the forearm strong down, and then stretch again. In this stretch, with this third stretch, you can also stretch with your thumb, which opens up the carpal tunnel really nicely and gives your hand a nice stretch. You can test either one and see what you like the best. When you're finished stretching with the forearm strong, you're going to have 3 impressions on your forearm. You want each of those impressions to be touching, the edges to be touching each other or maybe overlapping a little bit. So you're going to have the first one almost on the side of your forearm, the second one's going to be close to the middle of your forearm, and the third one is going to be right in front of those 2, all overlapping somewhat like the Olympic rings. A question we get asked quite often is, how much tension should you create? What should you feel when you're stretching? And the answer is, it shouldn't hurt. This stretch shouldn't hurt, but it should be a bit uncomfortable. If it's just too much, if it's too painful, if you really are having a hard time stretching because it hurts too much, then back off the knob. If you aren't feeling much, then you need to tighten the knob, because if you're not feeling it, it's not working at all. So it should be a bit uncomfortable, but it shouldn't be painful. Some of the pitchers that use the forearm strong really like to stretch the top of their forearm, specifically the muscle called the supinator, because this muscle, they say, allows them to finish and release much freer and get a little more snap in their pitches. And the way you do that is just slide this onto your forearm up to right about this position. You're going to have a muscle, the bigger muscle is called the brachioradialis, and then to the side on the elbow you have your extensors, and you can see those moving by wiggling your fingers as well. Well, right in between those 2 is the supinator. That's the muscle that supinates your hand at the end and creates that snap. Well, you can move the forearm strong right up on top of that muscle. Tighten it down, and then you want to shorten these muscles. You want to extend your fingers to the sky. You're not going to need to tighten the forearm strong as tight on the top of your forearm. But with your fingers extended, your hand extended, and the contact right over the supinator, tighten it down 1 or 2 turns. And then what you're going to want to do is actually curl your fingers and make a fist, and then flex. Hold that for the same amount of time, maybe between 10 and 30 seconds. And then when you're finished, loosen the forearm strong up, loosen up the strap, and just move it down just so that you're about a full impression from the contact down further towards your wrist. Tighten it back up, extend your wrist again, tighten down the forearm strong, and then do the same stretch. You can do that in about 2 or 3 spots, and that really stretches the top of your forearm out really nicely.